Hello, my name's Scott. I'm the Assistant Curator of Arms and Armour at the Royal Armouries in Leeds and also one of the lead curators of the new Tudor Power and Glory exhibition. What I want to talk about today are the weapons used during the foot combat at the Field of Cloth of Gold. So how does the foot combat fit within the wider diplomatic context of the summit, the Field of Cloth of Gold itself? Well, basically, it was an opportunity for the knights, the competitors, the kings themselves to demonstrate their strength, their skill at arms, and their bravery. And thanks to several very good, very clear and thorough first-hand accounts from people such as Sir Edward Hall and Marino Sanuto, the Venetian ambassador who was present there, we have a very good idea as to how this event might have played out and might have actually looked. So from these accounts, we know that the event took place within the lists, so the arena where the joust would have taken place. We know that it took place along a barrier that divided the two teams, and we know that this barrier was actually long enough to accommodate 20 along each side. But actually, the event itself only involved 2 versus 2, and this was basically so that the knights had an easier chance, a better opportunity to show off to the crowd. We know that the event was split into 2 rounds, the first being compulsory, the second being optional. Now, the first round involved 2 weapons, the punch and spear and the single-handed sword. The second round involved the casting dart and the two-handed sword. Now, the single-handed sword, two-handed sword, we have a fairly good idea as to what they look like, so I'll not go into too much detail on those, but the punch and spear and the casting dart are a little bit more difficult. Now, we know how they were used. We know that the punch and spear is a stabbing, thrusting weapon, and we know that the casting dart obviously is used for casting or throwing. But we don't really know what they look like, so we have to do a little bit of educated guesswork. Now, fortunately, within the Royal Armouries collection, we have a phenomenal group of Henrician staff weapons and spears. And we basically selected 2 for inclusion within the exhibition, Class 785 and Class 756. Now, these are obviously not tournament weapons, but they could give us some idea as to how these tournament weapons would have looked. Now, one of the great shames of looking into tournament weapons is that so few actually survive, and this is just the nature of the beast. Tournament weapons have a very short working lifespan, often no longer than the event itself. We actually have account stories from the Field of Cloth of Gold which describe the spears being shattered and the broken staves being used to beat the opponent over the head. So it was a pretty rough affair. It's not surprising that so few of these do actually exist. But as I say, we can use other existing weapons to give some indication as to how they may have looked. Now, as I say, the punch and spear was a short stabbing weapon, and we've looked into the etymology of the word puncheon. It alludes to things being short. It alludes to sharp, pointed tips, a little bit like a bodkin, which was probably not the case for these tournament weapons, being unsafe for such an event. The casting dart, on the other hand, is perhaps a little bit easier to figure out, and we have 2 ideas. It may have been a short throwing weapon like a javelin, or it may have been something like a dart, a giant dart that you might use in a pub. And we actually have an example that was recovered from the Mary Rose. It was an incendiary dart, about 2 foot long, with leather or wooden fletchings at the end. So we have 2 ideas, pretty good ideas, but we don't know which one was the case at the Field of Cloth of Gold. Now, the two-handed sword. I'm sure you can all imagine what a two-handed sword looks like. But actually, there's a bit of controversy regarding this at the Field of Cloth of Gold. Now, in the exhibition itself, we're including a very large example, Class 9633. It's a stunning example. It really is a beautiful sword, beautifully balanced, beautifully weighted. Unfortunately, these things very nearly didn't get included at all during the event. So prior to the Field of Cloth of Gold itself, there was a bit of a diplomatic to and fro between Henry's team and Francis's team. Basically, Henry was determined to have these things included. He was very fond, very skilled with the two-handed sword. It took a lot of skill, a lot of strength, and a lot of dexterity to use them well. And this is actually what concerned Francis. Francis didn't want them included at all. He was concerned that such large weapons basically wouldn't put on a good enough show for the crowd. He favoured smaller, lighter weapons that could be used in more flourish and flair and be more entertaining to watch, basically. He was also concerned that the larger two-handed swords would just cause too much damage to people's gauntlets. So there was a bit of a to and fro, a bit of arguing, and in the end they decided to compromise. They decided to include the two-handed sword as an optional second event. So those who wished to answer the challenge could, those who didn't want to, didn't have to. So, finally, on to the poleaxe. We have included a poleaxe in the exhibition. Unfortunately, they weren't used. They did not feature in the foot combat at the Field of Cloth of Gold at all. And we don't really know why. There's no mention in the diplomatic exchanges prior to the event. There's no mention in any of the first-hand accounts of why they may have not been excluded. Excluded rather. So again, we're left to educated guesswork, really, and all we can assume is that they weren't included for safety reasons. These weapons were developed to mitigate the safety and the protection offered by plate armour. And even within the regulations and the rules laid out to ensure safety within the foot combat, these things were still very, very dangerous weapons. Now we know that both Henry and Francis would have been taught and would have been familiar with these weapons. We think we know the name of Henry's tutor, Thomas Simpson, who was Master of Axes. So it's highly likely, in fact it's certain, that Henry would have been an incredibly skilled fighter with the poleaxe. So it seems strange that he fought so hard for the inclusion of the two-handed sword, but there's no evidence of any diplomatic exchange, any arguments regarding the inclusion of the poleaxe. It's a bit of a mystery, unfortunately. So at that, I will say thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little insight into the exhibition and the weapons of the foot combat. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, look out for further videos, and thank you very much. Hope you're all staying safe. See you later.